I actually haven't had a chance yet. So, Unidentified is one of those shows where I feel like I have kind of I don't want to say a love-hate relationship with, because honestly, I haven't watched a lot of episodes yet. I watched most of season 1, and then season 2, I watched the first half of the first episode. I haven't watched the rest yet. Um, I tend to aggregate content and watch it all really like at once, basically. But I did hear that they talked a lot about some kind of general stuff about experiencers and kind of digging all of that into there and everything else. And it's just such a complicated challenge, right? Like trying to do what TTSA is trying to do right now, that I almost feel like the TV show would just make me. I don't know. I worry that watching the TV show would like set my expectations in a way that maybe I don't want them to be set, I suppose, if that makes sense to you. It's kind of an interesting thing. I don't know. The clip from the end of the last episode. I'm going to have to check that out. So it's interesting, actually. So I'm looking at some of the questions and stuff that people put on there. So I'm trying to do this as like an AMA style thing, hopefully. Although, oh my God, Discord is going insane right now. I got added to the last podcast in the left Discord, and it is going insane. I'm going to mute this for like 8 hours, I guess, until that stops. Oh my God. Can't we all just, Alejandro, what's up, man? Can't we all just get along? That's the goal. That's the goal, man. I was just on, so it's funny. I was just actually on, I'm doing a Patreon interview episode with a bigger podcast than mine. And one of the questions they asked was, well, why do you think people hate on To the Stars Academy so much? Or even why do you have such like a negative reaction sometimes to some of the stuff they put out there? And the answer I gave really was that they're trying to be kind of something for everybody. So you can't, if you think like the main kind of factions in ufology right now are the nuts and bolts crowd, the more metaphysical crowd, and then sort of, maybe I guess the I don't know what the word is, the militarist or the military kind of viewpoint of things. Even if those are kind of the three main camps, that's probably not even true. There's way more than those just fighting all at once. But if you think about those three main groups, if you say something positive that the materialist camp likes, you're almost certainly going to make upset the metaphysical camp. So it's sort of an interesting thing where you can't, they've because they're so sort of fundamental or centralized in the field, no matter what they say, they're going to get themselves in trouble. And that's why I kind of don't want to even watch the show sometimes, because I'm like, I know that the stuff they do on the show or the statements they make or whatever, I feel like I used to spend a lot of time paying attention to that, but I'm not sure it's really that important anymore. You know what I mean? I'm kind of like, let's just, when evidence gets out there, that's what I want to see. I don't necessarily know if it matters. I don't know what they put out there on the TV show or what they do out there in like media and stuff, because at the end of the day, it's not going to do anything for me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not going to change my opinion on things. And so all it can do is make me, I don't know, more mean on Twitter, more of a dick on Twitter. I'm just not trying to live that life right now. I'm just trying to be totally chill. But it's hard, man. It's really hard. So let's see here. Some of these questions we got already. So one of them actually is kind of funny. It was someone was saying, so initially we got 6 minutes left, man. We got 6 minutes left until I said to people that this was starting. Honestly, I'm like thrilled that there are even some people here right now. To be honest with you, because the last one of these we had a pretty okay turnout, but we're not a podcast. we're not a podcast show, or we're not a YouTube show, I should say. We're a podcast, so we focus on that. Yeah, man, for sure. It's 100% like it is very fleeting, the kind of stuff that happens out there. And it's rough. It can be really rough, you know. I mean, that's the cool thing with some of the stuff we're trying to do with like Skyhub is, you know, trying to sort of get away from that part of things where you're really focusing in on the specifics or on the kind of nitty gritty about what someone says. And at the end of the day, like, I know I do this too. I misspeak all the time. So it's sort of one of those things where I'm like, does it really matter? You know what I mean? What they say out there? I mean, I guess it does, but I'm not sure that, again, at the end of the day, it's not going to change anything, you know? So I don't know. It's sort of an interesting thing. I don't know, man. So it is currently like thunderstorming really bad here, which is pretty exciting. It's pretty good beginning of the week, I think I'm gonna have. Thinking that's probably the way things are gonna go. So on Twitter or on Discord, I had like 3 different names, which is ridiculous and challenging. Yeah, Skyhub should be pretty exciting, actually. So actually, that might be kind of cool. So one of the funny things that we've been looking at actually is, so we found a paper, and we didn't really find it actually. This was from Chris Rutkowski, sent this over to us, or sent it over to me and was like, hey, you should probably read this. So the first thing that we're trying to do is actually do like a literature review. So a basic kind of look at the science that's out there or has already existed on this stuff. And so one of actually the video or the papers that he said or he suggested to us was, so let me pull it up here. It was this crazy paper from like the 1960s, and it was from the U.S. The military. It was actually from, I don't think it was from NASA. So here, it's this paper. So the paper was called "The Use of Baker-Nunn Cameras for Tracking of Artificial Earth Satellites" by Arthur J. Brandenburger, who was the professor and research supervisor of the Department of Geodetic Science at the Ohio State University. So that paper is really interesting because it goes over essentially this attempt that the military made, or rather the Air Force, I should say, tried to make in like the late 60s, or not late 60s, excuse me, late 50s, early 60s. This effort that they put into effect where they essentially tried to do very similar to what Skyhub is doing now. But they had this like comically complicated structure here. And what's actually kind of funny is, so there's a quote in here that I got a kick out of, and I was like, I had to tell the guys what this quote was here. But it was something like they said that the camera itself, or because of how complicated these cameras were, the cost of one of these was something like $200,000 at the time, which is crazy, right? And we're trying to build them, or we are building them, not even trying. We're building things that can do some of what this is able to do for, $200, $300. So it's pretty exciting, actually. It was a really cool paper on like the history of this stuff, or talks about some of the history there that was going on, which is really cool, which is a lot of fun. Yeah. So one of the things that people ask me, and I'm wondering actually too, can I actually, dude, I got to learn how to use this. I got to learn how to use YouTube better. I'm wondering if I can actually add my screen. Hilarious. No, of course not. Why would it be able to do that? That's hilarious. Anyways, all right. Let's answer some of these questions here that people had. And actually, UFO Twitter Discord was really good in this, which was awesome. So that was really great. So one of the questions we got, and actually it's one that we get a lot, is how do we feel about the pod being referred to as a skeptics podcast? And how do we personally feel about it? So I can't speak for Marie. On my end, or I guess kind of from my perspective, I don't mind being called a skeptical podcast or a skeptics podcast. That's really how we started. And I mean, I guess really at the end of the day, that is what we are. We are a skeptics podcast. We're taking a skeptical look at these topics from different perspectives. So that's not all that surprising to me that that's how people take us. I guess the one thing I'll say, and I think this is true for all skeptics generally too, or all skeptics that get involved in this, is we're often looked at as, I guess, more like Philip Klass than someone like, say, Stanton Friedman, or I don't know, any of the other kind of smart people that got involved in this. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think we're all kind of skeptical at different levels for different types of stuff that we do. Even within this field, you can have folks who are really, really skeptical of one type of encounter versus another. So you have some people who, the minute they hear any kind of religious intonation to anything someone else experiences, they just assume that must not be the case, right? They just throw it away. On the other hand, you have folks who, if it fits to their religious conviction, that means it must be true, right? It fits perfectly for what they're trying to do or what they think. So they just assume that must be true because it fits with my own description or what I also have going on. And in either of those cases, those people are being dogmatic about what they believe. And so I think there's a difference between being skeptical and a difference between being skeptical and being dogmatic. You want to be skeptical always. We should all try to be skeptical, especially when dealing with stuff like this that is so kind of out there. But being dogmatic, that's not good, right? That is sort of by definition, hurting what you're trying to do, right? You're cutting yourself off from evidence or potentials or whatever. So it's that's, I guess, the way that I would look at that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really like that. Yes, I don't like dogmatism. I don't mind being called a skeptic, but I don't really like dogmatism all that much. So, here we go. So, do you have a position on Tic Tac? Has it evolved over the years as far as skepticism goes? Yeah. You know, from the beginning, I've said we don't really know what the Tic Tac is. I think, frankly, I have never read a radar return. I have never been, outside of like maybe once as a kid on a Boy Scout trip to visit like a naval destroyer or something crazy. You know what I mean? Like a battleship that was sitting in a harbor someplace. I don't think I've never been on a naval ship. So I have no experience or no reason to doubt or think that my opinion on what the Tic Tac is any more valid than the people who deal with those pieces of equipment every day and have had that genuine experience. That being said, I think that's probably the case with anything. So, you know, I don't think we know what the Tic Tac is. I think that there has been some really good discussion coming from folks that are more on the skeptical side to say that this could be something that we're misunderstanding or that we're misattributing. This could be something. It could be something real, though. Still, I don't think any of those skeptical sort of takedowns of the Tic Tac video have been particularly effective. But at the same time, I'm not sure that the breathless defense of the Tic Tac video, trying to show that it is 100% unknown, those sorts of things. I'm not sure that that's really been effective or even helpful either. I think that really all we can say at this point is we don't know what the TikTok video shows. And outside of us being or finding experts to testify to the way that radar returns are read or having been on these ships or whatever, which the pilots and the people that were there, those are the type of people you would call. So, I think at the end of the day, to just not take them at face value as being good sources of info on this, I think that's silly. I think that's again kind of a dogmatism, right? You just knee-jerk assume that since it can't be the case, it isn't the case. But that's an assumption you're making. That's not true. That's not necessarily the case. Yeah, it's a really good question, though. I mean, I would say though what's been kind of funny is my view on TTSA has changed a little bit. I would say over time, that's probably true. At the beginning, I still do believe this too. I thought that Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon and those folks could probably find a better team to be working with. You know what I mean? Like I kind of always thought that I personally, as someone who is skeptical of this stuff, I take kind of association and history of cases as very important. I tend to look at that really strongly. And so to have some of the kind of questionable stuff with TTSA and connections to Bigelow and then connections to, say, like the Bob Lazar story with publishing the autobiography, I can understand that because we did an episode on Bigelow, right? We did a whole series on Robert Bigelow. Does that make us, that doesn't mean that we support or believe the things that Robert Bigelow believes. We just kind of had it, right? We had an episode on it. There's that like super badass lightning out there. So I think there's a way that they could have. We should be reading horror stories. This is so good with the thunder and lightning outside. I think there's a way that they could have discussed and had the Lazar autobiography come out through them, and still not have it seem like they supported it in the same way. And maybe that's unfair, and I get that. But so anyways, my view on TTSA has always been, I think that they should put it, what's the word? I think that they should just be careful with the message, I guess. That's the main thing for me. That's always been the main thing. And that's always kind of been my view there. So let's see here. What was another question there? Yeah, the lightning is pretty awesome. Pretty great overall, I would say, which is pretty good. All right, so this one is from Berlinghoff Rasmussen. Why are some people so insistent that the moon is hollow? How does the science bear this out? That's a very fun question. So I don't know why people are insistent the moon is hollow, frankly. I think there is a lot of in the world where the Earth might be hollow. that is in this world, but in an Earth where in the world where the Earth might be hollow, which is sort of the world of pre-glacial continental drift geology, we thought that perhaps the Earth had a hollow center to it. And that also caused us to think that other planets should also have a hollow center to them. And because the moon, some of the reasons that the moon is hollow argument kind of goes over time is because people have, like, the moon is kind of interesting in that its orbit and the Earth's orbit is kind of synchronous in an interesting way. The moon is sort of this thing it's like, it's the closest celestial object to us. So people have always said that, something special is going on up there. There's this thing of fascination, everything else through mythology and sort of cultural history and everything else. But also, frankly, and this happens a lot with kind of pseudoscientific ideas and paranormal ideas too, in some ways, is because the Earth being hollow was supposed to be this place where demons lived or angels lived, or any of these other kind of mythical, magical things existed out there. And when that didn't pan out, when that didn't happen, and everything else, people just sort of transitioned it to the moon. And they're like, well, the moon's got to be hollow then. If the Earth isn't hollow and there's no mole people here, then the moon is hollow and there's like super secret space Nazis or whatever. And that was kind of the shift that happened, which wasn't great. And yeah, here we go. So Havelock here gets a good point here, right? So yeah, seismometers installed on the moon by the Apollo missions recorded moonquakes, and the moon was described as ringing like a bell during some of those quakes. So that's another piece of evidence that's given for why the moon might be hollow. But like, again, if the moon is hollow, like the moon being one of those celestial objects that we can see all the time, we would be, I just feel like we would be able to see it, right? Like we'd be able to see stuff happening up there. We would be able to think, I guess, or devise experiments to test this. Yeah, really interesting stuff here. So the argument, I guess, was that it must be hollow because it rang like a bell. But that's not necessarily true. That could just be, and again, a quake, like what is the quake responding to? Frankly, I don't know about geology to make that kind of big claim here now about that sort of thing. But it's just a super interesting idea, but I think mostly it's coming from, what's the word? I think mostly that's coming from this kind of idea of mythologizing about the hollow Earth. And then those ideas being brought over to the next best thing, which is, of course, the what's the word? Which is, of course, the moon, which is right there. So another good question here. So why do geneticists and anthropologists think of what do they think of the hybrid theories floating around about humans having some extraterrestrial genetic material? So this is one actually people have asked us to do for a while. And we just haven't done it because I don't know enough about biology to make any kind of good arguments or claims about any of that stuff. I would say though generally that they don't take those theories well. They don't think that there's a lot to them. The issue is that the issue with that, frankly, is that so the issue with that is that we frankly don't know enough about, I think, like, first off, we don't know at all. We don't know much about what sort of extraterrestrial or whatever biological entities might exist out there. We have no idea. And we don't really have any good way we have no really good way of telling, I guess, what their genetic material even would look like. So any test like that or any kind of idea or theory out there that says anything about the genetic material of aliens or whatever, all of that is based on assumptions. And so those assumptions are always just going to be that. They're always just going to be assumptions until there's evidence to prove them. Some of the evidence that's been floated out there for this are things like, humans have some humans have a genetic sequence in their DNA that is not possible or not present in everyone or everything else. And all of that just isn't, again, it's an assumption, right? I mean, one of the simplest one of the most kind of basic theories in biology right now, not right now, but just a fundamental theory in biology is evolution, right? And evolution ultimately says, really at the most simple form, that things must have evolved to be the way they are because they're that way. So, why are giraffes' necks long? Well, because that is the trait that let them survive, that led to them being here with us today, right? And we can kind of make the same argument for genetics, I would say, in some ways, where why is our genetic code the way it is today? Well, it worked. We don't know why, but it worked. So, and I don't think we need aliens or extraterrestrials or hybrid engineering programs or anything else to make that case. It feels very much so like ancient alien hypothesis, where we don't need them to make sense of how we built these structures. And I think the same is true of genetics as well. We don't need them to make sense of that. So here's a good question. So Joel and One, hey guys, oh my god, and Corey, what's up, man? So Joel is asking here, why haven't you got your own Netflix show yet? You know what, man, I'm just not handsome enough. I don't know what's going on with that. How much of a problem do you think space debris poses for human space endeavors? I actually don't. Honestly, I don't know. We haven't sent. The good thing about space is that it's pretty empty. So, it's one of those things where we have debris floating around. And actually, what's interesting is a lot of the research that SkyHub is learning from and is reading right now, the science team is reading and going through, a lot of that research focuses on understanding, tracking, and analyzing those pieces of space debris that they're not satellites, right? They're not things that we've ever tracked before. So we actually don't know all that well how they're orbiting around the Earth. And sometimes they're not orbiting necessarily, right? They can just be floating through space outside of Earth orbit. In both of those cases, those things can pose challenges, but outside of orbit is more of a challenge because there's nothing there's no boundary condition, which would be the gravity well of the Earth, on their trajectory in space. So some researchers are actually doing sort of a telescopic version of SkyHub, where they are using machine learning and kind of visual tracking software to teach software to look at the trajectory of a piece of space debris, and then from that estimate sort of where it will be, right? Which isn't really complicated math, but the challenge is separating out the noise, right? Those satellites, the other things you already know. So really, I think eventually it's going to be a challenge. It'll be a problem. You can just imagine if we're all able to leave the planet, right? If space travel becomes sort of ubiquitous enough that we have companies and everyone else leaving the Earth, I think it'll be quite a challenge. Now, you actually give kind of a funny question here and end of the question, which is, could we use something like a net or a soft screen? I guess I think that's what you're trying to ask there. Could we use like a soft screen to as the debris is floating by, we just catch it? I guess we could do that. It also seems like if I don't know what we would do with the. It feels to me like if we are able to leave the planet, we probably don't want to waste anything that we could use as material. Because even pieces of space debris are going to have, will likely have like aluminum and silica and iron potentially and other elements that we would want maybe when we get to another planet. So I actually wonder if it wouldn't be oh, that's hilarious. You were talking about your phone, which has a soft screen, I guess? That's weird. All right, anyways. I would be surprised if we didn't want to have that stuff out there almost to capture to use later, right? So I'm wondering I guess what I'm getting at is I'm actually wondering how much of a problem space debris would be ultimately in the first, say, like generations of space travel, because I feel like whatever we get rid of, we're going to want to recycle, because you don't want to have extra stuff. Having extra stuff on a spacecraft, assuming we don't have an infinite energy machine someplace or whatever, that's just bad. Getting rid of stuff and wasting that energy and fuel to transport stuff you can just happily get rid of, that's pretty dumb, and you're not going to want to do that. All right, so another question here, good one from Corey. Tell us about metamaterials and isotopic ratios. Why scientists think some materials are from somewhere else? Yeah, it's a great question. So metamaterials actually mean something specific. They don't just mean like special materials, right? A metamaterial is actually a material that's been structured to have to interact with radiation in interesting ways. So a really good example of a metamaterial actually is I'm wondering if Vanta Black would be considered a metamaterial. So I'm not really sure actually if Vanta Black would be considered a metamaterial necessarily. But essentially what a metamaterial is it's a composite structure that have interesting properties, essentially. Usually we're talking about at like the nanometer scale for those interesting properties. And in particular, we're thinking about like 3D structures, 3D architectures that generally can alter. So right now they're being used for things like refractive indices, how they interact with like forces. So how something like hits a structure and then it responds to that force in different ways. And also things like, how would a material respond to, say, like thermal radiation, like heat shielding, right? So in all those cases, these are materials that are being altered in such a way that they will have interesting properties at the bulk scale, despite the structures being changed being at the nanoscale. So nanoscale, we're talking like 10 to the minus ninth meters. And bulk scale really is basically anything like 10 to the minus third meters, like millimeter, centimeter, right? The bulk stuff you can hold in your hands. Metamaterials you can do really interesting things with because actually, Corey, this goes to a question you asked the other day in the Skyhub chat, which I didn't get a chance to answer and I keep meaning to, about the way that materials interact with radiation, essentially. So when you have a chemical bond, that chemical bond has a bond energy it is analogous to a guitar string. So when you pluck a guitar string, it'll make a note, and depending on how taut that string is, you'll get a different frequency of note. And in the case of a guitar string, the force that you're applying to the string or that kind of bond, the force you're applying is physical. It's kinetic energy in the you're strumming the guitar. And then the output is the sound wave in the pressure wave that is generated. With a chemical bond, you can actually shoot infrared radiation at the material. And then the radiation, and not just infrared radiation, but kind of any radiation really, at the material. And depending on the force, in this case, the energy of the photon that's being absorbed by the material, you will get a different response out. So famously, this is utilized for things like Raman spectroscopy or infrared, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, FTIR, and other kind of chemical analysis techniques. X-ray diffraction also works a very similar way, but X-ray diffraction in that case is not looking at chemical bonds. It's looking at the the crystal structure itself and how that diffracts X-rays back. But in both cases, it's a similar sort of idea, right? So you can imagine, like, if you think about waves as, just think about like ocean waves, right? If you are in the ocean and there is an 800-foot wave, right? And it's going to wash over the ocean. There is a point essentially where that wave will have minimal effect on you. Because for all intents and purposes, that wave, or that's like maybe a bad example. Maybe a better example is, say, low tide and high tide, right? Between high tide and low tide, what's happening is the water is it's rising and then it's falling, right? In that way, it's a periodic pattern. It's essentially a wave pattern. But because it's such a big waveform, because it takes so much time for that rise and fall to happen, it might occur without you never realizing it. On the other hand, if there was someone pushing down on something to create a wave pattern from occurring, if these were really small waves that were about the same size as you would really hit them, right? You would really feel them in that way. So in the same way, that happens with the rate, with the energy that happens from, or rather with the waves that are coming from infrared or X-rays or gamma rays or whatever, right? So any electromagnetic radiation can affect your molecules in some ways. What matters, or what will happen, is kind of dependent on the wavelength and frequency of that wavelength or frequency, I guess I should say, of that radiation coming in to hit you. So in the case of, say, infrared waves, right? So and actually this is what happens with, say, the greenhouse effect. So you have all these photons coming in from the sun, right? You have all this light energy coming in. It goes down through the upper atmosphere. It gets hit on the Earth, and then it comes back. And then the light that isn't in the infrared band will just go through because it's not interfering with anything. But the stuff in the infrared band, which is essentially thermal energy, that is absorbed really well by certain molecules. One of those molecules being CO2, but also water, methane, other greenhouse gases. So, and what happens there is it hits the molecule. The electron that's within the bond of that molecule then gets excited. It will eventually de-excite, and then it will release radiation again in the form of a photon with a certain wavelength. In chemistry, we actually can measure that effect, and we can essentially ID chemical structures based on the infrared peak, the spectra that is given off by a certain molecule. So, like CO2 has a specific infrared spectra that is given off when it hits radiation of this way. Methane has the same, they all have their own kind of, essentially. And this is actually the same thing that happens with, say, like UV light. When UV light hits your skin, and then it causes a sunburn, what's actually happening is it is disrupting the DNA inside your skin cells and, causing them to break down. So anyways, the reason the metamaterials are thought to be interesting is because supposedly their structures can be built in such a way that they can interact with specific types of radiation, specific types of electromagnetic radiation that might be of interest. So one of the ones, like you're saying here, so Puthoff has discussed this bismuth magnesium metamaterial might be a terahertz waveguide. Maybe it is. I don't think anyone's ever tried to shoot terahertz waves at things, really. Terahertz waves are actually so what's interesting actually with terahertz radiation, it's sort of in between that's in between microwave and radio waves, I want to say. Or no, microwaves and infrared, right? And so it gets absorbed a lot by gases. And really, because we've mostly focused on things like, say, we've really focused on like infrared or microwave. We haven't really ever focused on terahertz waves. And it's because of that, we haven't really ever studied it all that much. And interestingly, too, what's hard about terahertz waves is the ability to generate them, not so much necessarily, I would say, to absorb them or gather them in an interesting way. Like, that shouldn't be the case, although I'm not read up enough on that to say either way. The issue I had with or still have, I should say, with the metamaterials, this bismuth magnesium metamaterial, is that the structure that they're saying is interesting is not it's not very interesting from the perspective of, I guess, kind of what I and other people are able to generate in a lab. So, and actually not even interesting necessarily from the perspective of stuff that you could do at home. Those layers on those materials appear to be at the bulk scale. They're just greater than, or they're just smaller than bulk scale structures. But we're talking like almost the size of like aluminum foil. Like that's like the same kind of general area or the same general size we're talking about here. Now they're saying it's interesting because it's sandwiched one on top of the other, but that's actually a really common structure for things to take in nature. My entire PhD work focused on building things like that because nature is really lazy and likes to stack stuff. It's just like a really good energetic structure for things to take. So we've known how to engineer or create things like the TTSA or the bismuth magnesium sample. Can't say the TTSA material because we don't know that for sure. But we've been able to build things or generate things like the metamaterial sample that Linda Moulton Howe had in her possession that then was sold to TTSA. As far as we know from all the information we have to us today, it appears we've been able to generate those sorts of structures since like at least the 1940s, 1930s. Why you would generate something like that is unknown, I guess. Some of the ideas have been things like it is a vapor deposition target. So some of the stuff that we can do in a laboratory that does like vapor deposition, say, is actually build like atomically thin layers. So like one atom thick of something, another atom thick of something else, right? So you can really build like crystals. You can build structures individually. One of the ideas for the TTSA material is that it's a bismuth sputtering target, essentially. So it's kind of a piece of debris that you would then throw away, but would have like consecutive layers of structure there potentially if they're doing multiple tests, right? That's one theory. Another theory is something like, say, electroplating. That's the problem with this, right? All we can do is rule out stuff that is. It's sort of like that show was called Fact or Faked, Paranormal Files, right? Like you can't test the thing. Like TTSA has the material, they could test it. But for us on the outside, all we can do is say, is this something we could do or is it something we couldn't? And based on my knowledge of material science and just kind of basic chemistry, that is something we could do. And we've been able to do for a long time. Now, TTSA might release a paper in tomorrow or whatever that says, actually, this thing has, phases of matter, or not phases of matter, but phases of crystal, thermodynamic phases, crystal structures that we've never seen reported in the literature. It's brand new on Earth. It's all this other stuff. And then I'll eat humble pie, right? I'll be like, oh my God, they were totally right. But from what we know now, it does not appear to be very interesting. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't study it. So isotopic ratios was the other thing you wanted to ask about. That's like a common kind of lazy answer for people who are interested in science who want to look at alien stuff, to say that because the isotopic ratio of a material is different than it would be on Earth, say that it must be from outer space. And that's actually generally true. That's actually, it is one way that we test for and look for meteorites and other pieces of space debris that aren't from this planet in any way is we look for isotope ratios of material that is different than what we have here on Earth. And that's because the Earth, when the Earth was created of a certain selection of space debris that all, it all has the same isotopic ratio, right? Our planet has a nuclear chain reaction undergoing in the center of it, or kind of continuing, I guess I should say, that leftover heat and the reaction that occurred that kind of formed all matter here. Whatever came from us or whatever came to be formed, what we call the Earth today, that's all decaying at the same rate. I botched that explanation completely. But essentially, when heavy elements are created from things like supernova and whatever, they start to decay radioactively. And since it makes sense that the Earth would probably be made from all the same stuff when the planet was created, it's all been decaying at the same rate. But other planets aren't necessarily decaying at the same rate as the stuff from Earth is. Or they might have been around longer. They might have been around for less time. They might have been whatever. So different isotopic ratios are a good kind of proxy to see and say something must be from off planet or not. The problem with that is just because it comes from space doesn't mean it's interesting. We actually currently study stuff from space for things like magnets, because there are crystal structures that can form in space or might form in space that we haven't formed on Earth, that they don't form naturally here on Earth. So that maybe is one area that could be interesting, maybe, but I don't know. It doesn't seem all that. I just don't think if we get a piece of an alien ship, I'm not sure that we would know what to do with it. So another question here: is there potentially some relation to this and dark energy or dark matter? Vibrations that don't interact with our chemical bonds in our matter. Not necessarily. This is more saying that there are types of energy that are so large that they don't really interact with our molecular structure. Radio waves is a good example of that. Radio waves are so large that they basically just kind of wash around us, right? We feel no effect from them. Our molecules aren't affected in any way. But because we expect that chemistry and physics is the same everywhere in the universe, does it make sense that there would be chemistry or physics that doesn't have, does it make sense that there could be molecules that would not be affected by IR or would be affected by other types of radiation? I'm not sure that would make sense. I'm not sure that would really matter. I think regardless, your bond length is pretty limited. So one question here is, excuse me, would love your thoughts on the future of UFO field investigation. It seems like most of us are waiting on TTSA and the New York Times, plus we're all stuck in quarantine, and field investigation appears to be at a really low point. And that was actually from Wizard Master in the UFO Twitter, or the Reddit RUFO Discord server. So I personally think that the future of UFO investigation is with groups like Skyhub, and with things like, say, Sighting and other projects like that. That's really why I'm helping with those, right? That's why I'm involved in those. I really think that we all have, like I said before at the beginning of this, when the Air Force was trying to do some of the stuff that, like, say, Skyhub is doing now, and when they were doing it, it was the early 60s, and the technology was extremely expensive. There was no easy way to do it. We today have the computational power in all of our homes to do that kind of work. And all it takes really is a couple of smart guys like Corey and Steve to put that structure together, and allow us to kind of get a sense of, okay, this is how we build this thing, and this is the software we would need, and this is how I can install it, and this is how, X, Y, and Z, right? All those pieces are kind of being put together for people. So honestly, from my perspective, that's where this field is going, or that's where I think, frankly, science is kind of going generally, is in in some ways it's almost a regression, because, and I don't mean regression in a bad way. I mean regression like a reverting back to the way things used to be. When some fields started, like if we look at, say, like ecology, right? At the beginnings of ecology, or even zoology, it was interested people at home who were just kind of going out there and studying things. And those people's kind of efforts and training and everything else led to the creation of this science, these fields that actually exist today. And I would think, or I believe, I guess, that the same thing can happen for stuff like this. And the quarantine is making it happen, right? The quarantine is giving us all the time and the kind of fire under us, I guess, to make something like that occur, which I think is really cool. It's super exciting. All right. So one more question here, and then actually I think I'm going to sign off probably. But I want to do more of these. Did people like this? Did people have fun? Do they think this was at a good time? Was it too early? Was it too late? Like, please leave comments on this so that I know, should I do more of these? Should we try to get these going more often? But actually kind of a funny question here that was given that I think was kind of cool was was asking if I prefer biscuits or cake. I guess from someone, I'm guessing from someone from the UK. And my answer as an American is I prefer apple pies. My friend, that is what I prefer, actually. And getting back into the Halloween spirit, that is 100% what I prefer. So actually, I wanted to give folks some. I wanted to give folks some, I guess, idea of some of the stuff that we're looking at for later episodes and stuff like that too while we're here, because I think it'll be super fun. So actually, give me one moment and I will pull up some of these things. So hold on one second. Okay, so, oh my God, Corey, hilarious. Yeah, more info about SkyHub. We want to do these we got to do these for SkyHub too, man. We have to do these, absolutely. Okay, so I thought it'd be kind of cool to go over some of these books. So first off, this is a book, and I feel like I did this in the last one of these I did too. This book is probably like the single, it says Mysteries of the Unexplained. This book is probably like one of the most impactful books on my journey into this stuff of all time. This book is awesome. It's from like Reader's Digest, I think. And it's just got like, it's just a bunch of stories about like, you know, spooky, crazy things, right? So there's the Romanovs, right? And talking about Rasputin and everything else. Oh, and there's Dora D'Agostino, the woman who bought me this book. What a great time. Hi, Mom. And so here, actually, this is kind of funny. So this here is a page right out of this book, right for Marie, right? The Kraken. Pretty good stuff there. So this book is fun. And you can see, like, this is a well-loved book. Like, I have parts of it, like, ripped out, like, falling out at this point because of how old this book is. So this is an important book to me. And one that we actually get a lot of show ideas from still because it's just, like, the perfect book of all time. The other one, actually, that I thought was kind of funny would be showing folks this is the John Maloney book. This is Alien Odyssey, a true story by John Maloney. This is the man himself, right? That's John Maloney, NICAP investigator and man of the hour. And actually, what's kind of funny, he signed all the books that he made of this, which is really cool. So I have a couple of copies of this that, you know, he signed, which is awesome. And there's actually some really cool pictures in this. So hold on, let me see if I can find one. So here, so the title of this photo is Phyllis looking at mountain while strengthening aura at Rock City, New Mexico. So there's Phyllis strengthening her aura in Rock City, and then this is Phyllis. What's it? I guess again doing her aura or whatever. Phyllis soaking up energy. Excuse me, she's soaking up energy there. So yeah, it's a pretty fun book. It's good stuff. Anyways, anyone who wants to get a really good idea of, in my mind, the current state of this field and just like all these weird fields, like the field generally of, I guess, kind of paranormal, what Jeb Card would call the paranormal unified field theory. Anyone who wants a good feel for that, or like what that might mean, or kind of some of those ideas that like Jacques Vallée talks about and everything else. If you're not like big into reading that kind of stuff, read this book. This is a comic book by Neil Gaiman called The Books of Magic. This book is actually one of, like, this series, I think, is a very good introduction in some weird ways to some of the ideas that are out there in this field. And anyways, the next one actually that we'll be doing on the show that I'm really excited for, the next alien thing we'll do, is based on this book, Bringers of the Dawn, Teachings of the Pleiadians. So I'm excited as hell, people. It's going to be awesome. And yeah, anyways, people, thank you so much for joining this. It was a lot of fun. I hope it was as much fun for everyone else as it was for me. I am going to I'm going to sign off here now, but thank you again for joining us. And we'll do another one of these soon. So please comment if you liked it, and we'll have to do another one. All right. Bye, everybody.